So what we'll see here is an example using temporary storage from a pipeline to actually merge fields for two content types together across two separate jobs. So remember, a temporary storage will last as long as a transaction lasts. In this case, we're going to be making use of a pipeline transaction, and we'll be running three different jobs that will all share the same storage. So that way we can set values from one job, such as this media entity job where we want to combine a couple of its fields, and retrieve those fields in our article job to merge some of the media entity values with our article job. Now, we can take a look at our source, and what we'll see is we have an asset that we'll be migrating over first. We then have the media entity, which is kind of like a wrapper to the asset itself, where we have our asset referenced, as well as some alt text and caption details and values. And these caption values, as well as this media image, are all things that we want to merge to our article content. Now, our article content simply references the media entity itself, and it doesn't have the caption values on the article itself. Now, at our destination, what we'll see is we have our media wrapper content type, where we can see the title, and we'll even migrate the reference to the media itself. We'll also have the article content, where we have our featured image field, which has a reference to the image that we'll be populating with the image that we want to reference, as well as the caption value, which is what we're going to be populating, and we'll be merging these two fields from the media entity content with this article content. Now, if we take a look back at the ImpulseSync configuration, again, looking at the pipeline, we'll see that we have three jobs configured and set in order to run, where we're going to first migrate that asset. We'll then migrate the media entity content, and then finally we'll migrate the article content. And remember, we'll be using storage to store values from our media entity content and retrieve them in our article content. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the configuration for these jobs. We can take a quick look at the asset content job here, where really we just have our source and destination configured, no manipulators, very simple, or we're simply migrating the asset over as it is. The second job to look at is our media entity media wrapper content type job, where we are going to have our source and destination endpoints configured, and then we have a couple of manipulators. Now in this case, we have two store manipulators because we have two specific values we're interested in storing. So looking at our first store manipulator, we'll see that we are using these optional values for the store key and the store value. Now, firstly, let's notice that we have the apply on. We're going to apply it on write. This means that we want to run this manipulator right after we pick up our content. So we've picked up our content from our source. Now, boom, we want to run this manipulator with how the content looks now, right after being picked up from the source. And what we'll see here is first we have the optional store key value. This store key value is how we're able to create in Impulse storage what key we want to be able to look up with. So in this case, we're going to basically be using what is the ID of this content. And we're setting the content.id using a liquid template to set the ID as the key value in storage. Now, under this key value, we want to also use a liquid template to create the specific value we want to store. In this case, we're going to take the field called field Penton Media Caption, and we'll take that value and store it as the value here. So what are we doing? What we're doing here is we are taking the caption value for our media entity, and we are storing it under the media entity's ID. So when we go to retrieve this from ImpulseSync storage, we're going to need the media entity ID to retrieve the caption value that is stored under it. Now, looking at our second store field manipulator, we'll see something very similar. But rather than storing the caption field value, which was really just a simple string, we're actually going to be storing some data such as the image we want to reference. So in this case, again, notice apply on. We want to apply this manipulator as soon as we've picked up the content. And we have our store key using a liquid template where we're going to use, again, that content ID as our part of our key. But now we're going to append or prepend file and a hyphen. This way we have a unique key value for this field that we're going to store. So to retrieve this value, we're going to need to search storage with file hyphen content ID. Now the value we are storing under this key is going to be the field Penton Media image value. In this case, this is a reference to the file from the Drupal system. So we are actually basically storing what is the ID of the file we are referencing. And obviously you would be able to use your liquid templating and playground, test liquid template and playground with the content from a debug report to verify what this value is to make sure that your value that you're storing or even the store key you're creating is all accurate. Once these two manipulators are set up, we now know that we're going to store these. Once this job runs in the pipeline, we're going to store these two fields as we set up with the store key and store value. And we'll make use of this in our next job, which we can look at here now. So our article job, we'll be able to look at its configuration. And what we'll see is we have content manipulators created to actually retrieve the values that we just stored. As far as storage is concerned, we'll take a look at our liquid field manipulators. So we are actually opting to use our liquid field manipulators with our filter getStoredValue to retrieve values from storage. We do also have the getSetField manipulator, which could be used to retrieve values from storage as well with some additional options such as being able to build that store key. But in this case, we want to do some additional parsing and whatnot, so I opted not to use the getSetField manipulator, but instead use the liquid field manipulator. But again, to retrieve from storage, you could use either the liquid field manipulator with the getStoredValue filter or the getSetField manipulator itself. So what we'll see though is we're going to first look at how we're retrieving that caption value. So we want to set and create the field featured image caption. And notice again, we're going to apply this as soon as we've picked up the content from our source. So we pick up our article and we want to run these manipulators. First, what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called store key where we're taking the value of the field Penton link media featured image. Now, this field value from our article content, our source article content, is actually going to be the content ID of the media entity that we used as the key for storage. So this is a reference to that media entity content where we used the media entity contents ID as the key in storage. We're able to then take the value from our article where we're referencing it, which is the ID, and use that for our store key. Next, we'll notice another bit of liquid templating where we use our filter, getStoredValue. We're going to pass it our store key, and this will go to ImpulseSync storage, check for the store key value passed in, and return the value as necessary, allowing you to either add it to the current input or replace the current input. Finally, I am running a strip filter, making sure that both the front and the back do not have additional white spaces, as we do not want those added. So this is how we're able to use ImpulseSync storage to retrieve the caption value that we stored in our previous job. And this is using our liquid field manipulator with the getStoredValue filter. Now we can look at the second liquid field manipulator, which is going to be very similar. But rather than obviously getting our image caption value, we want to get the actual featured image itself. So here we're setting up the name and the ID of the field that we're populating. We have our apply on, again, at right, we want to apply this right after we've picked up the content from our source. And now we're going to make use again of a couple assigned variable values in our liquid template, where we're going to first build our store key. Now remember, unlike the caption, we used a different key for storing our featured image and the image that we want to reference. In this case, we wanted to prepend file hyphen to the ID of the media entity. So we're making sure we build the store key value as necessary. And now we're actually going to be building a full relationship field using the impulse field value, since we want to reference a file at the destination. So we're going to actually create another variable here called child ID, where we are using our storage, ImpulseSync storage, where we're going to get the stored value for our store key. Remember, that's file hyphen content ID. That's the referenced media entity content ID. So we'll check storage for this value. We'll make sure that we clean it up to remove any additional white spaces as necessary. And then we're actually going to pass it into ImpulseSync's ID mapping, so that way we have the correct value for our destination migration. Because obviously the value from our source is not the same ID as the value at our destination. So we're using our ID map to take what we retrieved, which was the file ID of the file to reference from our source. We're passing it into our ID map to return the destination ID that we need for our destination content as we're going to migrate it. And finally, here we have our pattern for building a relationship field in Impulse using the impulse field value, where we set our child ID as the child ID in this JSON object. Now that we've looked at the configuration and how to use the ImpulseSync storage with our manipulators, we can take a look at the content that we did migrate over and how it looks. And what we'll notice first is we have our asset migrated, if we take a look at it, as well as our media entity and our article contents. So we'll take a look. We can see we have here our asset successfully migrated over. Next, we can look at our media entity, which is now media wrapper, where we have that title moved over and the reference again to that media asset. And finally, we have the article content, where we mapped the title, and we were able to retrieve from storage the featured image that we want to reference. So we're no longer referencing the media entity in the article, but the actual image itself, as well as the caption for that image, taken again from our media entity and now put into our article. And this is just one example of how you're able to make use of pipelines and the temporary storage of ImpulseSync through a pipeline to merge fields from two different content types together to be able to get the result that you want at your destination.